Good morning, everyone, and welcome to today's webinar, Expose Privacy and Cyber Risks Lurking in Your Workplace. I'm Allison DeFlorio, and I'm honored to have with me today David Rosenbaum from our partners at Citrin Cooperman. Hello, David.
Hey, Allison. Good to be with you this morning.
Good to be with you too. And every time I talk to you, I learn things that I wasn't aware of. And I leave feeling better informed and more aware. So I'm excited for those of you that took the time to join us today to listen to David's wisdom and perhaps walk away with a few tips and pieces of advice on how you can create that culture of safety in your organization as it relates to cyber and privacy. A couple of housekeeping tips before we get started today. This session is being recorded, and we will send a link out after the session so that you can, if you have to leave early or if there's someone in your organization that you think would benefit from this information, please share it with them. Your phones are muted, but your questions are important. So if you have a question specifically for David or myself, please put it in the chat. We will do our best to address the questions throughout the session. And we'll also have our contact information at the end. So should anyone have a question or you want to reach out to either one of us, please feel free to do so. We have some talking points to walk through, but this is really about a conversation around what to be thinking about. So your questions are important, and we can, again, do our best to guide those. So without further ado, I'd like to at least start off with some formal introductions. Some of you may have joined webinars with Exude Human Capital before, and maybe perhaps with me. But for those of you that are meeting us for the first time, I'm Allison DeFlorio. I'm the co-founder and managing partner of Exude Human Capital. We are a full-service HR consulting firm headquartered in Philadelphia, Pennsylvania, with a national reach. We work with organizations of all sizes to ensure that their HR practices are inclusive and equitable, and that they support the talent strategy of an organization. What I hope to share with you today is our work in helping organizations structure policies, and also how we work with HR teams to create that organizational culture, because cybersecurity is not just an HR or an IT function. It's a total organization function. So where I can, I'll share some examples of how organizations have done that successfully. And I'll turn it over to David.
Good morning, everyone. I'm Dave Rosenbaum. I'm a partner at Citrin Cooperman. Citrin Cooperman is one of the country's largest accounting firms. I am not an accountant. I'm an IT professional. I joined the firm a little over 10 years ago. My company was admitted to start the IT consulting practice for Citrin Cooperman. We are not the firm's IT department. We're strictly a client-facing unit. My background started with an undergraduate degree in math and physics and the hard sciences. My MBA, which kind of speaks a little bit to working closely with Exude on topics like this, my MBA is in management theory and organizational behavior. So it's very much that intersection between technology and the sciences and organizations and corporate management and corporate culture, how they fit together. And I'm a third generation entrepreneur. So I come at this from the standpoint of a business owner and the kind of issues and concerns that a business owner would have while trying to balance out staff engagement, profitability of the company, privacy, security, data protection, corporate identity, all that stuff that works together hand in hand. So I bring all of that together. I've been doing this for about 45 years now, starting as a bits and bytes programmer on Wall Street and evolving to the whole world of cyber and security and data protection and organizational growth.
I just want to add a little disclosure here. We have the personal pleasure of working with David and Citrin Cooperman, both for our outsourced IT needs and our accounting needs, and they're fabulous. And David is constantly, again, keeping our organization safe. So we look forward to having you share your expertise with our group today.
Thank you.
So specifically, what we're going to talk about today is really how do HR and IT partner together to create an organizational culture of safety and security. We know, HR and IT have the reputation of we are the ones who tell you what to do, and we're the ones who create policies that are not convenient and not fun. But hopefully, will help you think through how you do this in a way that's meaningful and make safety everyone's uh, role. Because we'll also talk about employees being your biggest risk and your best defense. I shared with David before we got on. I actually did my safety training this morning, my cyber safety training, my quarterly cyber safety training this morning, just in anticipation of our conversation today. We're going to talk about policies. Privacy policies, are they meaningful? Are they well communicated? And then lastly, we're going to share some key takeaways that you can share with others in your organization. Again, a reminder, this is a session for you. So should you have questions, just please type them in the chat and we will do our best to keep those moving.
Alice, let me drop one little definition in here that I think may be useful.
Sure.
In a lot of these discussions, we get into the topics of privacy and security, which are often thought to be the same thing. They're actually different. They're both areas of concern. And to think about them, privacy is your staff having the right to control how their data is used. And there are all kinds of controls and policies and protections and requirements around that. Security is about making sure the data, both personnel data and corporate data, doesn't get into the hands of people who are not authorized to have it. So they're two sides of the same coin. They're complementary. They both have to be considered. They'll both come into play in the types of things we're talking about today. But just so you're aware, there is a difference there to be thinking about.
Great. Thank you for sharing that. So with that said, let's kind of dig in here. And we teed this up as talking about how cybersecurity is really a partnership of HR and IT. So David, do you want to kind of talk a little bit about in your experience how that works and how you see that partnership?
Sure. What happens is IT is often seen as the folks who staff the help desk, who just make sure everything is running, make sure that the computers are up and operational, that everybody can get to the internet, that email is flowing. And my experience has been that that should only be a small part of what IT is doing. And this is going to be very similar. Allison, you can talk about the HR complement to this, because they're very aligned in terms of the posture and the roles. But what's really important for IT and for HR is not just to be the ones who keep everything up and running and functional. IT has a really important role as a strategic partner at an executive level. What IT is ideally doing, what IT needs to be doing, is being aware of risks in the marketplace, emerging technologies, differentiating what brings value to the organization versus what's just some kind of a flash in the pan or some marketing hype or some really cool tool that may be out there. My experience has been that most things that pop up on the market are useful to whoever thought of them and not necessarily useful to organizations. For a long time, my bookshelves in my office were filled with software. This one used to get software physically, but software that sounded great, and I thought we had to have it, and I licensed it and installed it, and it just consumed space on my computer and never got used. Where IT fits in is looking at these tools, looking at the software, looking from the organizational standpoint, and being a partner at the table to figure out what's going to help the organization and the staff. IT also has a role in advising about the risk profiles. The world of risk, both invasion of privacy and compromise of security, is constantly changing. I'm going to talk a little bit later on about one of the latest trends in that area around AI and what the cyber criminals are doing with AI that corporate policy is not yet adequately addressing. And it's the role of IT to be aware of these risks, to be thinking about them, to be educating the rest of the organization, not to be worrying about everything that comes along because that's not possible, but rather to prioritize risk. There's a whole model in risk management, which is risk-based management, which is understanding what the risks are, combining those with the likelihood of something that's a risk occurring, then looking at the impact if that risk does occur. So we kind of rate a scale, if one of the risks is somebody deletes a file, either inadvertently or intentionally. What's the impact of the organization? What's the likelihood of that happening? The likelihood is probably pretty high that someone will delete a file at some point across the organization that you need it. The impact may be significant, but if your backups are good, it's not significant. So you don't necessarily pay a lot of attention to that. Somebody clicking on a link and watching what the threat actors are doing and advising people through the training, through the education, through the awareness of more things to look out for and be aware of, that plays into a strategic role of helping to protect the organization because those threats are changing. People laugh now about getting an email from that Nigerian prince who supposedly left you $5 million. Currently, most people are aware that it's probably not real. What people are not so aware about right now are some of the emerging threats where the CEO claims to ask you to do something or to send out bank information so we can approve a wire transfer. And it's not something that people are necessarily thinking about as a risk right now. That's part of what IT needs to do. IT also needs to advise about best practices. So again, how do we incorporate what everybody needs to be doing into their daily lives, which we as IT professionals are reading about, watching out for, subscribing to publications and journals, and really staying abreast of, which people who are working in an organization may not be paying as much attention to. They've got other things to do and may not understand the implications, even if they were to follow that, much the same way any professional knows the nuance of their profession, but not necessarily the nuance of every other profession.
Interesting. And you said something that I just want to underscore. And you said, IT and HR need to have a seat at the table. And when I think about that, in many organizations they do, but in a significant number of organizations, they're told after the fact. But when I hear what you're saying, and I think about HR's role in all of this and helping craft policies that create the appropriate guidelines to mitigate risk and communicating them to employees who are your best defense and making sure they are clear on what is acceptable, what is not acceptable to protect the organization and also to protect themselves. HR and IT will hear different things at the same conversation in an effort to support an organization. For the HR people out there and the IT people out there, I see that as our role. Interestingly, I was reading in preparation for this webinar today that and I'm curious, David, if you've seen this, one of the newer ways of hacking into employer systems is through HR, through downloading handbooks, which are often readily available on company websites. So they're very real and they're actual documents, and then sending them out through an HR link saying, okay, David, you're new to the organization, or we're having everybody review and update their understanding of the handbook, scan this QR code and sign, and you will be set for the year. And once you do that, you have now allowed you've entered that person's computer. The other thing that I've also learned with HR is that they're creating very believable false HR portals that mimic HRIS systems. So people will think that they're logging into their morning portal to do everything that they do from an HR perspective. They're actually logging into a hacker's link. So from an HR perspective today, think about it organizationally. How can we create and craft policies and work closely with IT to create policies that are meaningful, that are understandable, that communicate the why, and that give the guidelines so that people can do their jobs and the organization is supported and risk-free. That communicating the why, David, why is that so important? I feel like that's often missed. I feel like people send out policies. Here's what you can do. Here's what you can't do. Here's how you do it. But there isn't the why, or the why isn't as prominent as it could be.
Oh, the why is critical. What I describe is in protecting ourselves and our organization, staff, users, team members, whatever terminology is appropriate within your organization, people are currently the weakest link in all of these defenses. We are all very busy. I've discussed with several people over the last couple of weeks that the world is getting busier, not
Hmm.
less busy. The flurry of email, I get hundreds of emails a day, literally, and trying to differentiate what's real and what's not real, and trying to take the moment to think about what I'm about to click on or respond to is hard to remember to take that extra minute. I remember I've been doing this for a long time, long before the world of email. And when we used to have a problem with the system, the first thing we would do is go to the computer room. Yes, there was a computer room in those days, and there was a telephone in the computer room, and we would take the phone off the hook. For those of you who remember physical phones and the phone off the hook, the idea was it gave us a chance to think as opposed to simply being responsive and responding to the influx of phone calls and people asking what's going on. With email, everybody's expecting an immediate answer. We often don't stop to think about what it is. There are many, many risks of cyber and privacy that we're all facing that impact the organization, which therefore impact all the individuals within the organization. Depending on the nature of a type of incident, there may be downtime to systems. There may be inadvertent or unauthorized disclosure of personal data, personally identifiable information. There can be credit card breaches. There can be all kinds of things that have regulatory implication in terms of notifying those people who may be affected, in terms of notifying regulatory authorities. We're working right now with a client who brought us on because they had a breach that exposed health information from the
Mm.
organization. They ultimately paid a major fine for that incident, which was the result of somebody clicking on a link they shouldn't have clicked on. And they entered into a consent agreement with the state attorney general that required them to go through 5 years of independent auditing. This
Oh.
is not a small organization, but about $1 million worth of fees over 5 years to meet the required auditing requirements. These are very, very real penalties. In the world of privacy and disclosure of data, if any of the participants are dealing with constituents in the European Union, either residents or citizens of the EU, the GDPR regulations controlling inadvertent disclosure of private data, which have significant penalties up to 4% of global revenue. Think about what a penalty of 4% of your global revenue would be for inadvertent disclosure of personal information on an EU subject, which can happen from somebody clicking on a link.
Mhm.
One of the biggest risks that is often overlooked in terms of why it's important to do this is reputational risk, which is if your company can't protect client data, why would clients give you their data in the first place? This is particularly true. We think about for-profit organizations. This is very true in the not-for-profit world as well. People who are making donations and contributions and funding not-for-profits are doing so on a very discretionary basis. Presumably, they believe in the mission, they trust the organization. But if that organization can't protect the identity of their donors, there's a strong reason for a donor to go find another organization with a similar mission to give their funds instead.
I would think also that the making sure you communicate the internal risk of employee personal private information,
Mhm.
which could be accessed as well. Do you work with organizations and kind of messaging that as well?
Not as clearly as they could.
Mm.
There's a lot of messaging around client data and not nearly enough messaging around personnel and internal data.
Interesting.
We just did for a client on this whole risk-based model. There's a concept called a risk assessment and a risk register. The risk register is where you identify the risks that could occur, either likely or unlikely, rate that likelihood, rate the business impact, and you tie that in with a data classification exercise, which is what data do you have and what risks apply to each type of data. And if you go through that kind of formal process of identifying your risks and identifying your data and classifying your data, there's a better chance of not losing sight of that personnel data, the internal staff data. If you think about it, organizations that have employees or contractors have tons of personally identifiable information from taxpayer IDs, dates of births, residences, phone numbers, all the information that is potentially of value to a threat actor. And that all needs to be protected. That's clearly part of the why for the organization that I would expect employees want their data protected as well. We're dealing with one client has a very formal know your customer KYC process, including for their employees. They do formal background checks on all their employees because they're dealing with very sensitive client data. They and their employees know that the company is focused on protecting all of that data, the client data and the employee data, which makes it a more comfortable place for employees to accept employment.
And I would think too, in communicating the why, and I know we see it in policies and in handbooks that showing, and you alluded to this, showing that, you're protecting organizational values and trust, protecting both internal data and client data is meaningful to help employees understand their role in making sure that they're doing the required training, that they're staying abreast, that they're questioning the email from the CEO that they don't usually get, or the Teams invite from the CEO that doesn't usually come directly to them. And then that makes a compelling reason for people to think about safety first.
It also comes that if employees and staff see management living by these principles of protection and safety and awareness, it creates that model from the top for everyone else to be doing the same thing.
Mhm.
If employees are seeing management being careless in their data, um, it doesn't set the right example. Everyone's in this together. We're all on the same side of this of trying to protect the organization and ourselves.
And that kind of leads us into our next area for discussion around developing cybersecurity policies. And we teed this conversation up about the alignment of HR and IT out of the gate. So, what has been your experience in helping craft policies from the IT perspective, and how
So
do you partner with HR?
So policy is always interesting. I've seen IT policies and HR policies that are very detailed and very technology or terminology laden that nobody understands. And if nobody understands them, it's very hard for people to follow them.
Oh, yes.
Equally, if they're hard to understand, people will often not even read them. If it's electronic, they'll scroll to the bottom to click, yes, I read this, when they haven't. Policies need to reflect reality. They need to be achievable. There is a model in the world of policies and internal controls of evolving maturity that no one's going to get everything right the first time. You can't go from 0 to 60 with your policies and expect people to follow them. What you need to do is understand where you're going, understand, I keep coming back to risk again, understanding where your risks are, develop policies that people can understand, train people on the policies, invite questions, invite comments. Again, IT and HR need to be part of the team, not sort of sitting behind a closed door someplace, just sending out these edicts. What's really important is to understand that it's kind of an interesting challenge, certainly in the IT world, around something we refer to as friction. Security always is inconvenient. Every time that somebody has to pull out their phone to put in a multi-factor authentication code where all they're trying to do is get into their email, or every time somebody has to change their password because the password's about to expire and they've got to come up with something. Our company, I think, is currently a 15-character passwords required. So they're trying to figure out what password I'm going to use this time. And I know I'm not supposed to write it down. How am I going to remember it? HR, you've got to take this training when you're in the middle of this really busy project, and suddenly you've got to take half an hour for a mandatory training class. Um, Understand that security and privacy are not convenient. The role of IT and HR in collaboration with the rest of the management team and staff is to find that acceptable balance between security and ease of use. I spoke on a panel a couple of years back with an FBI cyber crimes agent that speaks to this ease of use. And he described that the FBI has figured out how to protect yourself from cyber crimes and privacy breach. And they talk about this freely, how to protect yourself 100%. Their solution is don't use a telephone, don't use a computer, don't write anything on paper. And I quote the agent when he said, go sit in the corner and suck your thumb. This stuff is really inconvenient. The goal is we all need to use computers and talk on the phone and write things down on paper, either virtual paper or physical paper. So it's coming up with policies and procedures, understanding the business objectives, understanding the cadence of everybody's work, understanding in the current world who's working in the office versus working remotely, and take those things into account and come up with compromises. We'll never achieve in a practical term what the FBI has recommended of not putting any information in a tangible form. We have to figure out where the balance is of what we have to do, how we can do it, how we can minimize the impact and the friction while still protecting the organization to an acceptable level. And I say acceptable level because we'll never be able to protect 100%. This concept of maturity is as the risks are emerging and evolving and changing and the threat actors are getting better and doing different things, policies have to evolve along with them. And this comes on the HR side too, from the training standpoint, from the confidentiality standpoint, from the background check standpoint, everything leading to an employee coming on board and remaining as part of the staff, as well as the offboarding when somebody leaves either voluntarily or involuntarily. Policy. We were brought in by a client that had changed in senior management, and the new management got rid of the policy of letting IT and HR know when a person was terminated,
Oh my.
which is inconceivable from an HR standpoint. It meant they continued to be paid even after they were terminated. From an IT standpoint, they continue to have access to all the company's data and client data even after they were terminated.
Mhm.
Um, Policy has to be in place and has to be followed. Uh, Really, really important that this be done collaboratively.
I want to underscore a couple things that you said too, and I agree with obviously everything that you said. You mentioned that the language of policies has to be simple and easy to understand. And I think when we review policies, we often see policies that are so difficult for the average person to understand. When I find myself reviewing a handbook or one of our consultants reviews a handbook and we have to read a paragraph 3 times to really understand what it means, that's not an effective policy. And certainly for things like safety, privacy, security, you want to be very clear on why are we doing this? What is it? Who is responsible for what and when? And how do you report a concern and what steps would be taken. If you can just follow that, the key questions in answering a policy, that will potentially help you simplify. You can always have follow up more detailed information in links in your handbook or process policies. But for the handbook purposes, just be clear that people know what it is you want them to do or what the guideline is, how to do it, who to report to, who's responsible, and when or what are the triggers that launch your attention to that. The other thing that you mentioned that I think is important is that shared accountability. If you're going to have policies, but they're inconsistent enforcement across an organization, I'll use communicating when somebody leaves. That should be a standard policy across an entire organization. But if there's one department that just doesn't do that, or there isn't centralized HR in a smaller organization that normally is in charge of that, that can be incredibly risky and problematic for an organization. And a policy, if you're talking to an attorney, let's say you are hacked, one of the things they're going to look at is what policies did you have in place? How were they communicated? What was the reporting process to alert of concerns? And were they followed consistently across the organization? Were people held accountable to them? And if they're looking at any of those and saying, well, yeah, we had them. Yes, they were communicated, but David holds his people accountable, but Allison doesn't. She's let things slip through the cracks. That's going to put you in not as strong a defensible position in the event there's any litigation.
So in that realm of policies and needing to be followed, one of the things we strongly recommend is to not put something into a policy you're not going to do.
Yes.
It
Mm.
creates legal risk. I'm not an attorney, so that's not legal advice, but it creates risk if you said you're going to do something and you don't. It creates risk if you're not consistent around the organization.
Hmm.
You're better off putting into the policy that what you're going to do and enhance the policy over time. As
Hmm.
you put in place the controls you plan to do, as you do what you say you're going to do, you can enhance and improve upon that as the risk profiles change. I'll tell a story a little bit askew to that, but similar. Hopefully, stories are useful because I think they bring some reality to it.
Hmm.
We work with a client that was a publicly traded company that was subject to Sarbanes-Oxley compliance, which means they had to report on their security. And in meeting with the CFO of the company, he said, if I say in my report that our file servers and all of our data are sitting in an unlocked restroom at the end of the hallway that everyone else in the building has access to, I'm in full compliance with Sarbanes-Oxley because I've disclosed the risk. The minute I say that it's in a locked server room with a lock on the door and a camera and a log, it better be there or I'm not in compliance. In the former case, no investor in their right mind might invest in my company, but at least I've complied and disclosed. If you're going to put something in a policy, it's really important that you and everyone else in the organization follow it. Here's a policy piece, Allison, that you probably have in handbooks you review. If not, something I'm sure you're watching out for is what we refer to as an acceptable use policy. The concept of an acceptable use policy is most employees know what they're expected to do and not expected to do with their technology that the company provides them. They know they're expected to be using it for work purposes. They know they're not supposed to be using it to go to the web to inappropriate websites that could create hostile workplace settings or sexual discrimination environments or something of the nature. But if you don't put it in the handbook, then employees arguably have a defensible posture they were never told.
Hmm. And that, just for everyone listening, remember handbooks, you typically a new hire process, you send them the handbook, they're expected to review it. Some people do, some people don't. To David's point, there should be uh, policies in there around use of company issued equipment, your cyber policies. And then you can have processes that perhaps are policies that sit outside for special groups that are accessing different systems that not everybody in the organization accesses, but to have them sign it when they first start and then never look at it or sign it again unless it's updated may not be in today's world where regulations and policies and requirements are changing rapidly. You may want to think about doing it on an annual basis. So, on an annual basis, everybody, similar to the way many organizations will have you sign business ethics agreements annually, separate from the handbook, but to have your policies around IT and cyber updated or your handbook in general, just have it signed off on a regular basis. Would you agree with that, David?
Absolutely.
Mm.
In the policy work that I do around security, generally a guideline and a standard is that every policy should be reviewed at least once a year or upon
Mhm.
any significant change. Even if the review results in no change, you annotate in the change log of the document that says we've reviewed this and it's still applicable.
Mhm.
That way you're not being complacent about understanding change in threat landscape or regulatory compliance requirements or the nature of the data that you're actually capturing and storing.
The other thing I would add is make sure that when you are regularly updating managers on their responsibility in in upholding and holding their teams accountable for policies in the handbook. Some managers need to know the handbook really, really well, and that's not always the case. So, our little message for this piece is to make sure that HR and IT are aligned. review those policies, HRIT policies, the combination of both on a regular basis. Make sure that you're making the adjustments as the world changes and the policies and regulations change. And make sure your management team is trained on how to hold people accountable and that they do hold people accountable and enforce these policies.
Right. When we talk about people practices on the slide, since the world of COVID and the world moving to a much more hybrid environment, lots and lots has changed. And there's a necessary review and evolution of IT controls and HR policies.
It's interesting you say that. You know, I just came back from a week of vacation with my 20, 30 something nieces and nephews, and they're all talking about where they work. And, you know, I found this cafe down the street from where I live. I go there 2 days a week. I go to this place 2 days a week. And that just broadens the potential exposure of risk. So I'm glad you brought that up. In this day and age where not everybody's working in an office where you may have more control over the tools that they use and the systems that they have access to, or the ability for external players to hack in. Uh, those of you that are hybrid or remote workplaces, which are a lot, uh, you've got those added risks that you have to consider.
Besides just the tools they have, the concept of other people in the space. When
Yeah.
you when you're in an office, there's often better control of who's physically in that office. That if an unauthorized person, a guest comes in, that guest is often escorted directly to an office or a conference room and not invited to wander free and look over people's shoulders at their screens. If
Hmm.
somebody's working at home and the house guest is looking over the shoulder, oh, what are you working on? Major security, not forget about hacking, simply looking over a shoulder. You know,
Right.
airplanes are the same thing. Airplanes used to be the place where you couldn't get any phone calls, so it was a nice, quiet place. Now on airplanes, everyone has the ability to be on email, to be texting and chatting, and that just changes the whole threat landscape yet again. Fits into HR policy, fits into IT controls.
David, I'm curious to know, we do a lot of work in the HRIS space. We do implementations and optimizations. And so many of the tools have gotten really good. I mean, they can automate many of these tracking processes to ensure people have taken the appropriate security steps, that they've signed off on policies that they have. You can load the training in and deliver it through the system or have it streamed through the system. Um, you can have features in there to alert IT to, you know, different kinds of things. How have you seen the integration or security play into cybersecurity play into HRIS systems or integration?
So I hate to say it, I don't think it's been effective. And I
Interesting.
think it's not a shortcoming of the systems. I think the systems are capturing and doing what their algorithms program them to do, their programmers train them to do. And with the advent of AI, they are potentially getting better at doing what they claim to do. It really comes down to this integration we keep talking about between IT and HR and the rest of the organization to make sure, excuse me, that the relevant departments, HR department, for example, is using the tool, excuse me, to supplement and complement and streamline their processes and activities, and neither relying on the system without layering their professional judgment on top of it. Excuse me one second. They're not relying on the system to do their jobs for them. They're not assuming that because the data is in a system is correct or accurate. Uh, they're not necessarily taking the appropriate steps to protect the systems from inadvertent disclosure. I think that all technology is a tool and needs to be used in the hands of somebody who knows how to use it. So it is sometimes in the realm of training for the professionals who are using the HR systems. It sometimes comes back to the selection of the HR system. I was trained a long time ago that the way you select software is by starting to understand the needs of the business.
Mhm.
If you don't understand what you're trying to accomplish, there's a really good chance that the system you select is not going to do what you need it to do, even if it's doing what it claims to do. Salespeople are very good. Sales is a noble profession. It's a very difficult profession. I do not claim to be a salesperson. It is also one where a salesperson's responsibility is to try to, I'm going to qualify this in a moment. A salesperson's responsibility is to close a sale. Now, better salespeople, however, as I define better, are actually looking to make sure their products are going to be a good fit for a customer and not sell something that won't be a good fit because that will hurt company reputation. But if you don't know what you're trying to achieve, it's hard to get there. There's a joke about a pilot gets on the plane to an airplane to the passengers and says, "We've got good news and bad news." The bad news is we're lost in the fog and have no idea where we are. The good news is we're making great time. So having a system that doesn't meet your business needs, or not understanding how to use it, or not understanding the impact on your staff and employees is potentially not going to be useful. We've seen sort of a derivative of HR is time and billing systems. It's not quite the same, but it's related. If the time and billing system doesn't appropriately represent how the organization captures and bills for its time, if it's awkward and cumbersome to use so employees are not using it on a timely basis, or if it's insecure and doesn't have things like multi-factor authentication to get into a system that has information about all your clients and customers, there's significant risk and it's not going to be effective, even if it does what it claims it's going to do. So that alignment needs to be by design, not after the fact. This is where HR needs to engage the rest of the organization to make sure that HR is understanding the needs of all of the organization, not just the departmental requirements. Similarly, IT should not be dictating a system without getting HR's input and organization's input. And almost worse is if a member of the executive team comes and says, my buddy just said they're using the system, is fantastic, you need it as well. And management comes down to HR and IT and says, yes, we're buying this, go implement it.
We have encountered all three of those scenarios that you just described. And I do see the selection process needs to involve IT and HR and other members who will be users of the organization. Where we see these systems fall down is often on implementation,
Mhm.
right? Let's assume you selected the right system, but the implementation has to involve a group of people who are going to be responsible for championing this and using this. Because if it isn't implemented correctly, you're not going to get the benefits of the reports and the data integrity that you would want. And when it comes to our topic today around security, you're not going to have you're at risk of not having the system integrity that you sought to have. I'll just reiterate again that alarming soundbite that I saw about the fake portals that are now one of the new phishing hacks for HRIS systems, that they send a mimicked employee portal that people sign into that can open up vulnerability to the organization. So keep your HR and IT people close.
The QR codes are a major risk these days. There's a scam going on in the digital access world, or digital asset world rather, where there's a barcode, you can scan the barcode to pay your bill, and the threat actors are replacing the barcode at the cash register.
Oh my.
So got to be aware. Training. It's why I will never scan a barcode at a cash register.
Well,
I worry. I
effective
worry.
immediately, I don't think I'm going to be scanning them either.
I worry about the menus that are on barcodes in restaurants now also for the same reason, because you don't know what's been placed there.
Interesting. Interesting. David, can you walk us through a few of these tips and put a little color around them for building a security first culture?
Sure. So I spoke about leading from the top, that if the senior management is not setting the right example, it's hard to assume that the rest of the team is going to be doing the same. Everybody's job, with people being the greatest risk to security and to privacy. We talked about the why. Why is really important. Everybody needs to be part of the solution. Everyone needs to know the reason they're part of the solution. Everybody needs to know that if they do something inappropriate, intentionally or more likely unintentionally, they're part of the problem. And that awareness, as part of where the training comes from, is really important to people being part of that solution. Humanizing security training, yes, a pain in the neck, but it's got to be done, accepted. But I want to focus on the next couple. We talked about simplifying the policies and access. As we've said a couple of times, if people don't understand what's expected of them, if the policies are not written in a way that can be followed, if it's not easy to find out what to do, if you've got, who to call, what to do, if something happens, the policy is not effective.
Right.
They really need to be usable tools, not pieces of paper that people get. They sign when they are hired and they never look at again for as long as they're with the organization. Then they're not accomplishing what they need to do. Psychological safety is what we haven't talked about, and this comes to this whole factor of trust. That if management, senior management, HR, IT, and staff understand that we're all in this together, we're all trying to do something. There's a saying that was very popular still around: if you see something, say something. It's really important that there be safety in saying something.
Yes.
Most breaches start with somebody statistically today, with somebody clicking on an email, a link on an email, or opening an attachment in an email. There are other methods. That's how get into a system, but statistically that even has its own name. It's a BEC, a business email compromise. Everything's got an acronym to it. My favorite acronym is TLA, which is a 3-letter acronym. It's kind of but business email compromises have a name because that's a major threat vector of how bad actors get in. If somebody clicks on a link and has that, oops, I shouldn't have done that, it's critical that they feel safe in reporting it to IT and HR, because the sooner they report it, the better the organization is able to protect itself from the impact of that.
That's so critical. I mean, with all of our policies, right? Being able to report without fear of retaliation or fear of being, some sort of punitive action. If you do that, then no one will report a potential risk factor. And I will share with you, I just got an email a couple weeks ago from a client of mine that I communicate with pretty regularly. So it would be normal that she would send me an email. There was something about this email, and quite frankly, I don't remember exactly what it said right now, but it just gave me pause. I think it was about an invoice. It was about an invoice, and she said something, can you review this invoice and let me know if this is accurate, which is a pretty legitimate ask. But something gave me pause, and I forwarded it to her and I said, hey, did you just send this to me? And she had been hacked.
Mhm.
So, I think the psychological safety about asking the sender, or the psychological safety around reporting a potential breach or an oops moment.
So an important tip, by the way, if you get that email that doesn't quite feel right, my recommendation actually is not only to not click on anything, but to reach out to the reported sender,
Hmm.
not using a phone number or an email address that's in the email you received,
Right.
but use a phone number that you have that you've used before for that individual and call them. But this is this friction again. It's a pain
Hmm.
in the neck. It defeats the efficiency of email. But pick up the phone, call the person and say, did you send this? Because if the sender sent it, you can present, we're really watching out for your security and ours. That's why we confirm these phone calls. And if they didn't send it, you may be the first person who let them know they were breached.
Right.
They may
Right.
not even know it. That, by the way, is critical on emails. It's critical when you get things like banking instruction changes. You don't trust the banking instructions that you got an email. Our account number has changed. For those who may be in warehousing or distribution, don't accept an email that has a change of shipping address or change of billing address. Pick up the phone with a phone number and verify. Interestingly, if you get one of those emails, don't forward the email to your IT department because that just spreads it around.
Interesting.
Report to the IT department, I just got this email, or with your phone, or take a screenshot and send a screenshot of it, not the actual message.
I learned an interesting tidbit in my training this morning. By the way, a plug for know before,
Mhm.
KNOW before. They're very simple, short segments, very easy to digestible cybersecurity training. But the tip that I got, they gave an example of a group that was communicating on Slack. And they said you could plug in anything there, any other system, but they got a message from their IT department that there was that you had to install this patch immediately. And obviously, IT is not generally going to send something like that to your Slack channel. So just basic common sense, but maybe not so when you have a culture that communicates a lot of information on Slack. So I thought that was an interesting
If,
tidbit.
if you get an email from your bank that they lost your password, change banks. Don't give them your password. But the psychological safety, if anybody thinks that by not reporting it, nobody will know. If an incident occurs, the forensics team will be looking for where the attack came in, not to blame the person, but rather to make sure they've contained what the threat is. So if anybody thinks they're hiding it, they're not hiding it. What's really important, by the way, in the psychological safety is when there's an incident and the FBI is brought in, which is often the case if there's any kind of money transfer involved. The FBI views us who are the impacted by these as victims. We're not causing these, we're victims of them. Somebody who clicks on a link by mistake is truly a victim of an attack, and needs to feel safe in reporting it and helping to protect the organization.
Mhm.
Security and onboarding and offboarding. I spoke about the offboarding, make sure that people are offboarded rapidly. Onboarding, train people right from the beginning that if they receive that handbook by email, they're expected to pick up the phone and verify that this was in fact sent by the HR department. Celebrating good security hygiene. This is a tip that I share. Make security and privacy part of every organization's culture all the time. One of the techniques that I recommend to do so is make security part of every company meeting. For example, people get together on the Teams call or in the conference room if you're back in person, whoever's leading the meeting, ask everyone, did you remember to lock your screen before you came to the meeting? Costs nothing, took less than 5 seconds, and it reinforces that concept of privacy and security as part of the culture of an organization.
I love that idea.
There are similar kind of reminders. Um, security training comes along. Did everybody remember to take the training? If not, please be sure to do so by the end of this week.
Great.
Is it realistic and practical? Collaboration we've talked about. Everybody's on the same side of this. We're all part of the solution. Continuous improvement, that's the maturity. Measurement and reporting, I think that's qualitative more than quantitative, but whether people are paying attention and thinking that way.
Great. I know we just have a few minutes remaining, and we've talked about the fact that your employees are your biggest risk and your greatest defense. You want to add anything to to these talking points that would be helpful for our listeners?
So I think that a really scary statistic in the world of security and privacy is we in our organizations need to be right 100% of the time. The threat actor needs to be right once. The
Mm,
odds are against us. We need to be paying attention. We need to be thinking about that. The training, really, really critical. But I'll talk about training and these various phishing campaigns that Allison alluded to. Use them as a tool, not a weapon. I think we have time for a story about a client where one of our clients was a very high power executive. She sat on the boards of several publicly traded corporations. She had offices in multiple cities around the world. She had an executive assistant in each office. And she was concerned that her executive assistant in New York was goofing off. So we agreed to put monitoring software onto the employee's computer. Now, this is an organization where there is trust between management and staff. We were sure that the executive was going to use this to learn what was going on, not as a tool to fire her assistant.
Mm-hmm.
We observed that when the CEO was in New York, the executive assistant was busy the entire day. When the CEO was out of town, the executive assistant was shopping, planning a vacation, writing a book. But we observed that she was also checking the CEO's email every 5 minutes, responding to anything that happened immediately. The assistant literally had nothing to do the rest of the day.
Interesting.
And she was doing nothing inappropriate in terms of the website she was visiting. We shared this with the CEO, and the CEO said, thank you. And they went forward from there with no change in employment status and no concern, but a reassurance that the assistant was doing everything she was supposed to do.
Mhm.
Use it as a tool, not as a weapon. Use it to talk to employees if you see people spending time other than where they should be spending time. People used to go to the water cooler, and that was okay. Checking the sports score in the morning is not a bad thing. Spending all day watching a baseball game is probably not a good use of company time. I do want to put 3 tips in here because I know the 3 takeaways are really important. And it's hard to come up with 3 that were really practical, but I think I have 3 that really are practical. One thing that's really important is to take these risks seriously. They are risks to the organization. Everybody's part of the solution. Don't assume that because you're a small organization, they're going to happen to somebody else. Don't assume because you're a big organization that you've got people protecting you. Take them seriously throughout the entire organization. To management, because I know many of the participants on today's call are managers and above, lead by example. Don't expect the rest of your employees and staff and team to be doing things that you're not doing yourselves. Set the example, take it seriously, make it part of the culture. From my grad school training, culture is something you need to demonstrate, enforce, train, and live by. All of this needs to be part of corporate culture. It comes from the top. And the last one is engage your staff. Make sure that they know that they're part of the solution, not that they're part of the problem. They represent a major risk. They are a big part of the solution. As said before, we're all on the same side of the table here. We're all trying to protect the organization, the employees' data, our clients' data. Establish that trust that because we're all on the same side of the table, we're all trying to accomplish the same thing. We need to trust each other that HR and IT are not here to make our lives difficult. They're actually here to protect us and to help us protect ourselves. And that we as management have the obligation to convey that and live that. And management and staff have the obligation to do their part and say something and offer advice and offer suggestions and offer feedback.
That's great. And I just want to point and just reinforce this last bullet on this particular slide around training. And David, you spoke to, there's formal training, but there's that informal training that you take a minute and you talk about it at a standing weekly meeting or a standing all staff call. There's also sharing a story about what you learned when you took your training. That could be considered training. So yes, have your standard training for the formal training, but make sure that there's constant communication, transparency, and that's how you build trust through that communication. Make sure your managers are trained to communicate this as well. So
A wise person said to me that a communication is defined by the response it elicits. It's not as important what you say as making sure that everyone on the team hears and understands what you're trying to convey.
right, and that slide talked about behaviors. When you really know that you've been successful in training, it's because you see the behaviors change. So when you start seeing people calling and saying, "Hey, David, did you just send me an email to download, this new install for blah blah?" Then you know that behavior has changed. So David Rosenbaum with Citron Cooperman, thank you so much for being our expert today and for sharing the stories. We hope that everyone listening took away some good tidbits that you can apply in your organization. I will also remind you that this has been recorded, so we will send a link out. Please feel free to share that with people that you think may find it of value. And thank you all again for tuning in on this, Tuesday morning. We look forward to seeing you on our next webinar.
Thanks, Allison.